Welcome to another episode of Prime Focus, a spotlighting program that highlights issues of concern to individuals, families, and communities, bringing awareness and education with a view to bringing positive action through the lives of many people. We thank you for joining us tonight. And if you've never joined us before, this program is one that really brings about change in the lives of people. Tonight, we're going to be looking at a very important topic, which I call the matter, the matter of autism, specifically looking at destigmatizing autism. And we have an expert in the house who would be walking us through different things. I'm loaded with questions. I've already gotten some questions out from outside already put together. But of course, if you have any questions, you can also drop them in the chat so that our guest would answer them. Tonight, I have in the house Dr. Soji Abiona. Dr. Soji Abiona is a very accomplished individual, very modest in his approach, but very powerful in his impact. So I'm just going to introduce him. I'll put him up on the screen, and then we'll introduce him and then bring him directly into the studio. Dr. Soji Abiona, also known as the singing doctor, is a senior consultant pediatrician. He has been in the medical profession for over 20 years. He is a specialist in children's neurodevelopment with over a decade of experience in this field, which includes autism and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, often called ADHD. He's, he also has a keen interest in the field of pediatric genetics and is the neurodevelopmental pediatrician for the national services for a couple of rare diseases called xeroderma pigmentosum and cocaine syndrome. He is passionate about helping families to find explanations for the development needs of their child or young person and supporting them to get the help that they need. In his personal life, Dr. Soji is married and has three beautiful daughters. I'm going to invite Dr. Soji into the studio right now. Dr. Soji, thank you for joining us tonight, and you gave me a little bit of a mouthful with uh, pigmentousum.
Xeroderma pigmentosa. But thank you for the invite. It's such a privilege to be here. Thank you.
Right, it's a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
I know we had you on for another episode for something else completely different, but thank you for joining us. But before I get into the main thing we want to discuss, why are you called the singing doctor?
Well, because one of my passions is leading worship and singing, sometimes performance, but really doing that with the guitar is one of the things that I've done for since I was year high. So it's yeah, that's why I'm called the singing doctor.
Okay, awesome. So I guess singing also has its therapeutic uses as well.
Oh yes, oh yes. I mean, in fact, in one of my conferences, just to share a quick joke, it was on Zoom. It was during the pandemic, and there was a lull in the conference, and I whipped out my guitar and started singing. The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind, and a lot of my colleagues didn't know that I sung at that point.
All
It
right.
was quite a poignant moment. I was able to blend both my sort of academic and my hobby, as it were. So,
Right. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you for your multi-talented gifts that you make available. I want to get straight into tonight's topic. We're
yes.
talking about the matter of autism, particularly focusing on the aspect of destigmatizing autism. But first of all, what exactly is autism? I know so many people have heard it. Okay, somebody's autistic and all that.
Yeah.
But in the minute you see somebody hyperactive, does that mean the person autistic? So, what exactly is it, and what are the different forms of it?
Okay. So Autism is what's generally referred to as a neurodevelopmental condition. And a neurodevelopmental condition or disorder is uh, what are the different behavior patterns that can affect a child from when they were young and into adulthood. It is said that really in the United Kingdom, about 700,000 people are affected by autism, and that is about 1 in 100. So it's not rare. It's actually quite common. Some will actually quote 1 in 66, 68. So even in a classroom of children, there will be quite a few.
Mm,
In a whole year group, there'll be quite a few children who are autistic. So generally, it tends to be um, having an impact on the way people interact with the world around them. So it may be through communication, it may be through their very social interaction, and it may be through what's called social imagination. So individuals will often lack the flexibility. They want things to remain the same. They're more
mm,
comfortable with doing something the same way. They may have difficulty reading people's body language, so they may not be able to interact with other individuals. So it's typical that someone who is autistic may find crowds quite overwhelming,
mm,
if they're adults or if they're children. For children, which is the world that I work in, they're often isolated. They're the child who will prefer to play by themselves. Sometimes it affects, quite a lot of time actually, it affects communication. So some children may not speak at all. Some will speak, but they may not use gestures. They may be very blank faced. They will not use a lot of facial expression. So it can be something that affects, that can be quite a struggle for individuals. And there is also what's called the sensory differences or sensory difficulties. So individuals with autism may struggle with the sense of taste, smell, touch. Those
mm,
are things which they may actually perceive as pain and uncomfortable. A very common one is audio problems. So often sounds can be they can perceive it as very sensitive, even if to you and I may seem a general noise or a general sound, they may perceive it might be very uncomfortable for them. So it affects a lot of different aspects of individuals' lives.
mm. Okay. So would you say, in a nutshell, what is it? Except you
Yeah.
can't put it. Is it a disability? Is it a condition, medical
So
condition? What exactly is it?
yes, I mean it's we describe it as a neurodevelopmental condition. So it's
Right. Okay.
affecting the whole development of the child. So when we define neurodevelopment, we really talk about and something that has impacted on the way the brain has formed. It's not that we can see anything when we do a scan, but it may be in the micro connections in the brain has been affected. So
Mm,
individuals will think differently. They will experience the environment differently. One of the questions you ask is that is there different forms of it? Um, that is a very contentious issue. Nowadays, we actually now just talk of autism spectrum disorder.
mm,
That's the umbrella terms. There used to
right.
be lots of different definitions that people will give. People will have heard of Asperger's. People
Mhm.
will have heard about high functioning, low functioning, atypical, childhood autism. All those terminologies have now been unified under the term autism spectrum disorder.
Mm,
Um, Yes,
right.
and so yes, it is a neurodevelopmental disorder, but it causes a social disability, and
Oh,
often it's not visible. So individuals will actually call it a hidden disability,
mm,
because it doesn't affect necessarily the way you look. It just affects your behavior and the way you perceive the world.
okay. Thank you for that. Talking about ASD, bringing them all under a unified umbrella.
Yes,
How different then is it from ADHD?
yes. So ADHD is another neurodevelopmental disorder.
Right.
So another condition which affects behavior and developmental patterns of a child, which is as a result of the brain, the way the brain has formed and the way it functions. But the characteristics of ADHD are very different. So
Okay.
a person with ADHD will often have what we call inattention. So they struggle to focus. They're very distractible. It's a sort of person where, as a child, for example, they're doing one thing and then something catches their eye and they bolt to go and do that other thing. Often a person is hyperactive, so they can't settle, either physically or their mind is constantly active. And that can affect learning, of course, because you can't focus on what you're meant to be doing. And they can be impulsive as well. So the patterns are different, the behavior manifestations are different. It is possible actually to, and we see it quite a lot, where once you have one neurodevelopmental condition, you're more likely to have another. So other neurodevelopmental conditions are things like dyspraxia, which affects coordination, or also called coordination disorder. And there are quite a few other neurodevelopmental conditions. But under that umbrella, then you have the different strands: autism, ADHD, dyspraxia. They are all neurodevelopmental conditions.
Okay. Well, thank you for giving the different distinctions. So, just based on what you said now, ASD, unified umbrella for everything, is painting everything under the same umbrella dangerous then?
Well, I think the what we are realizing over the decades where we've been people have been researching and observing autism is that it is important to make the diagnosis. Making a diagnosis is important, because the earlier you treat the condition, or manage the condition, the better the outcome for the individual. Um, in the day and age where knowledge is increasing, we're finding that our diagnostic patterns are being refined, so that really we should be able to distinguish different strands of behavior. I know that often in some quarters there's often a an anxiety about overdiagnosing, and saying something and saying, yeah, that must be autism. Really, as a doctor, I would advocate that if there's a pattern of behavior that isn't clear, or there's difficulty with a child's behavior, then going through the proper channels to get that properly assessed and diagnosed is crucial.
Right. Okay.
It's crucial.
So basically saying no self-diagnosis in this.
Absolutely, absolutely
Right.
not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. Yes.
I guess you've touched on this. The next question that I really had about the label autism, is it helpful or does it affect perceptions?
I mean, it is helpful. I mean, one of the things that we're trying to do on a platform like this is to destigmatize, and over the years, because autism has become more recognized, and it's become it's come more into the public consciousness. The we're finding that people are more used to it now. So in terms of um, the usefulness of the diagnosis, actually, if a person doesn't get properly diagnosed, we know that when they go into adulthood, they are more, even when they as they go through childhood, they are more um, prone to anxiety, they're more prone to mental health problems, depression. And actually, it's been well recognized that adults who develop some of these conditions is actually because they may have had unrecognized neurodevelopmental problems as
Mm,
children. And one of that is, as we said earlier, is ADHD and autism. And so it is crucial to recognize and to manage these conditions while a child is young, because early intervention is one of the important keys that is really helpful. Because one thing I neglected to mention earlier is that neurodevelopmental conditions are not curable. Autism is not curable; it's a lifelong condition. So the earlier you catch it, as it were, the earlier you identify it, the better you can help an individual to adapt, to understand them, to know how to treat them, and how to help them.
that's very telling what you just said there. Because I've been having a conversation with somebody several weeks ago,
Mm.
He was on the understanding that they'll outgrow it, but there's nothing like that.
No,
Okay.
no. I mean, what tends to happen is that the manifestation of the autism can change over time.
Mm,
So what you often find, for example, a lot of children who may have sensory problems, as I described earlier, taste, touch, smell, some of that will change over time. Um, but no, you don't outgrow the core features, which are
mm,
problems with interacting with other individuals, problems with communicating, and problems with thinking in a flexible way and not being so rigid, which is something that individual, those are the main core features that individuals with autism struggle
mm.
with. They are lifelong.
Wow, interesting. All right. Thank you, and thank you for that. Let's come to the area of support. Then, I mean, I guess you've also touched on this already. I don't know if you're looking at my question paper here, but the question I had here was: is it a good strategy to try and catch people early, so that you can manage whatever you would call it, the effects of it later?
Yeah. No, it's an excellent strategy. It's an
Mm,
excellent strategy because when you wait too long, you miss opportunities.
mm,
I mean, I'll give you an example, and then this is an extreme example. One of the extreme, so autism is a spectrum, which means that there are different sides of the spectrum. There's, by definition, there'll be an extreme side of the spectrum, which is very far away from the typical. So when you look at children who are very far away from the typical, they often look as though they live in their own bubble.
mm,
They don't interact with people. They don't communicate using language, and they may have unusual body movements like flapping their hands or making repetitive noises. Even with children and individuals like that, if you put in certain strategies which will involve what's called intensive interaction, where you actually um, uh, mimic the child. So whatever they're doing as a parent, you're doing it. You start to get into their world, and then you
mm,
start to break down their reluctance to communicate, because one of the central tenets of autism is that individuals just don't have a desire to communicate. They don't really see the reason why they should communicate. But actually, when you start to help someone to realize that actually by saying it means that you are identifying to somebody else that you need something. By
mm,
forming those sounds and languages, they can start to interact. So the earlier you can engage, I mean, that's an extreme example, but there are others, there are lots of different strategies, which if you instigate them early enough, you can help an individual to start to, interact with the world around them. So
mm,
yes, it's an excellent strategy. Actually,
mm,
the earlier you start, the greater the potential to help the child to reach their potential.
mm. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Soji, on that point there. You just said from the example you gave that they may not want to communicate. Is it a natural characteristic of it, or is it a frustration that they're trying to communicate and people don't understand?
Well, you can get a mixture of both, but at the
Mm,
core of autism is that inherent um, preference to use language as a form of communication. It's almost as though a lot of individuals with autism don't see the need to communicate. It's almost as though they feel as though just because I'm thinking I need breakfast means that mommy recognizes that I need breakfast. In the gap between what I feel and what mommy understands, there is language.
mm,
And those individuals with autism don't often know that they need to bridge that gap by themselves. And that's one of the things you can teach them early. So often what happens in a lot of children, particularly when they're very young, is they just cry. You know, you don't know why they're crying. And then the parents has to sort of by way of trial and error present them with different things to sort of get them to stop crying. So they're crying out of frustration because they don't really understand that they need to to vocalize or to gesture in order to get what they want. So it's a frustration, but it's different to the kind of frustration where a child doesn't have autism, but they have a language delay.
Right.
So that child
Okay.
is, trying to communicate and saying words or saying it wrong, but they may get frustrated because nobody's understanding them. But in that child, you would actually see that they are using different methods of, they may be gesturing, they may be pointing,
Right.
they may be tapping, but they get frustrated because nobody understands them. But the reason why someone with autism may get frustrated is because I need this, mommy isn't giving to me. That's why they get frustrated. They don't really quite understand that they need to bridge that gap by using language in order to get what they need.
Hmm. Very insightful indeed. Wow. Audience, if you're watching this, please make sure you share this with other people. This is so good. Thank you, Doc, for that. Um, let's come to the aspect of actually, before I go into stigmatization, I thought
Mm,
I was throwing a different question now.
okay.
Now, based on all that you've said, and maybe somebody watching this or who will watch it later is like, well, I think I feel some of this or I've seen this in my child. What should somebody like that do when they think they might have autism?
Absolutely. That's a really, really good question. Um, so, if it is your child who you're suspecting may have autism, I think the first thing you need to do is to do a little bit of reading about it. Um, in the United Kingdom, there is the prominent charity that supports families called the National Autistic Society, and they have an excellent website which is geared towards information and support. So even going on their website, typing in what is autism, read about it. Once you start to see those points, I would actually say write them down in a way
Mm,
that it pertains to your child. And then the next port of call would be depending on the age of your child. So if your child is preschool, then in the United Kingdom, you can go to a health visitor and explain to them. And these days, actually, they've become more educated. Generally, there are always exceptions, but generally, they become educated in how to spot autism. So you can talk to them, and then they can make the referral on to see for your child to see a pediatrician like myself. If the
mm,
child is older, then you may want to go to the school. In fact, talk to the special educational needs coordinator. They are there for issues like this, and then they can make a referral to a doctor like myself, or indeed you could go to the GP. And if it is yourself, because I often in my line of work, parents come in, and whilst we're you know assessing their child, either I'm seeing it or my colleague is seeing it in the parents, or the parents is now saying to me, oh, some of the things that you're saying about my child, I can recognize in myself. So if it is yourself, then again, do a little bit of research, but go into trusted website. And again, I would commend the National Autistic Society website. And then going to see your GP. Because in this day and age, we recognize, and increasingly adult physicians and adult practitioners are recognizing that if issues like autism are recognized properly, it can actually be the explanation for different mental health problems that adults are struggling with. So
mm.
yes, that's kind of the ballpark of what you can do.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much for that. So, audience, if you need any help, the different places is mentioned it, your GP, going to your school if you're older, or going to also calling up the National Autistic Society so they can all give you some help there. Let's come to the crux of tonight,
Mm,
stigmatization.
mm.
In your experience, is autism stigmatized?
Oh yes. um I mean, I would say I suppose I'm an optimist, although I try to be a realist. I'm an optimist. I can say that since I started in this world many years ago, I mean, I've been training even before I qualified. I was training in medicine and pediatrics. I have seen that there is a shift where people are more positive in their perception of autism and neurodevelopmental conditions, but it is still very stigmatizing, particularly in certain communities.
Mm,
Um, Individuals just don't understand what autism is, and because it is not a visible disability. It is a disability, but it's not a visible disability. Often you find that families struggle. They may feel victimized because little Johnny in the middle of Asda is making a scene, is
mm,
crying, is throwing himself on the ground, and people are staring at the parents and wondering, why isn't that mother or father, controlling that child? That child is so spoiled. People even don't have to say anything. By their looks, you feel judged. So the stigma is still very much alive.
mm,
And really, it's platforms like this that will really help to start to break things down. So yes, sadly, people still have stigma, and it's really reflective of the whole area of disability as a whole. There is still a lot of stigma that is attached to having a disability, and autism is no exception, unfortunately, because people still stigmatize autism and having autism, or having knowing someone or caring for someone who has autism.
mm.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And as you said, you're an optimist, and so I like the fact that attitudes are changing, but maybe not changing fast enough. And
Yes.
of course, for the people who are experiencing it, the carers and family, that embarrassment might still
Yeah.
be there when the child behaves out of turn.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. In my prep towards tonight, I was doing a little bit of research myself, and I came across this research by some professor in the University of Bedfordshire, and he was saying that there's clearly some relationship between ethnicity and autism stigma and culture. And he mentioned three things. He said you find it in negative attitudes, negative knowledge, and negative behaviors. Would you agree with a statement like that, or only in a measured way?
I would agree. I would
Mm,
agree. Because as I said, in my line of work, I do see quite a lot of negativity being being directed. Parents tell me a lot of the time, and that's part of the reason why they come back to see us. Um, and really, when you look at the crux of it, it's because of ignorance. It's because of a lack of awareness, um, and it's because of attitudes. And really, if our attitudes towards a subject is negative, it affects our behavior, and if it affects how we perceive a condition. That's really been become familiar with this particular uh, researcher, and that's really what he was saying,
mm,
in that when we perceive the negativity, um, when we express and we behave towards individuals, um, it's because of that stigma. That's what's
mm,
really affecting our behavior towards them. So yes, I would agree that it is very much alive.
mm,
The stigma that individuals really are feeling, and really when you mentioned ethnicity and culture, um, and it is still very much the case that within the black and minority ethnic groups, um, understanding autism is not at the level that it should be at. There's still very much a great deal of um, of lack of awareness, I would
mm,
say, and that affects the way we perceive autism as a group of people, the way the families who are from that background, the way they experience autism. That's very much still having an impact, a negative impact, I would say, on them.
right. Wow, interesting. So when we talk about impact on the family because of all these, as you were talking, two scenarios come to mind.
Mm.
schools where maybe budgets are cut, and so um, the teacher can't spend all the time with a kid that needs help, or maybe somebody in, say for instance, a church scenario, and the child starts behaving, and like you find like eyes turning on you, and maybe you have the only thing you can do is maybe you have to leave the service with
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
child and things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
How impacting is it on the people?
Yeah. No, I mean you started describing it. You know,
Mm,
it's a horror
mm,
for families, and it's a horror for the child. So
mm,
if we take the situation for schools, for instance, in I've said, for example, individuals can have sensory problems. So a child may be behaving negatively, maybe because it's too bright, maybe because they don't tolerate quite so many people in the same room. Maybe it's because of the smells, or of the feel. So if you have a teacher who recognizes that, that can have a very positive impact, because you can start to think, okay, maybe if we dim the lights, we don't have to darken it, but you can make reasonable adjustments. um, and because of being able to define autism, if a teacher is feeling that actually we can't provide for what this child needs, there are avenues where you can get additional support for this child. So that's why, for example, making a diagnosis is important. Now, let's go to the scenario of church or faith groups. I think there's a lot that we can do, a lot that we can become educated and raising our awareness level, so that we don't marginalize people. The parent whose child maybe becomes upset in the service, and the ushers march them out, and the way they're treated will not encourage them to come back. So we need to be able to accommodate, we need to be able to understand, we need to be able to support families, and there are ways of practically doing it without making a scene, or without worsening or escalating the scene. Um, so yes, there's a lot of lack of awareness, and the impact can be so profound in that Mary, who is autistic, I'm just using a fictitious name, but Mary, who is autistic, does not get invited to as many birthday parties
mm,
as other classroom friends. And in fact, I read, this is a real story that I became aware of on one of the social media platforms, of a mother boasting that she didn't invite this particular child because he's autistic, and because she knew if he came, he will ruin everything. And you just think that is so heartbreaking, because there are reasonable adjustments that you can make. You can talk to the parents, you can see how can you accommodate, because one of the biggest issues is exclusion, isolation, that the child feels and the family feels. So the family that doesn't go to church because they are afraid of what might happen and how they might be made to feel, and the child who doesn't get to socialize. Although yes, socializing is one of the things they struggle with, but it doesn't mean that they can't do it. So there's so many sort of different levels of impact, that just having autism and the perception of stigma can have on an individual. I mean, we haven't even talked about employment. um, I mean, it is generally recognized now that only 1 in 6 people who are autistic are in full-time employment. You know, the stigma is that powerful that somehow when people find out that you are autistic, you become not the most favored for a job.
mm.
So the impact is far reaching.
Oh, this is truly telling. My goodness. Right. There's something about the health service provision, and it's two questions in one. One is the fact that there is a certain perception amongst some communities that the health care system or delivery system itself doesn't understand certain cultures properly. And so people feel they just go with a straight jacket approach in handling issues. And so it doesn't sort of encourage them to go. But the other part of the question on that is that isn't it also the case that the more people are open to talking about these things, the more services that can be provided for you?
Absolutely. I mean, addressing the first point, which um, is really going to the heart of the cultural sensitivity to assessing for these conditions. And I think there is more that can be done. Uh, when you look at, and I'm talking as a diagnostician, when you look at the tools that we use, a lot of those tools are very much geared towards, I suppose, a white Caucasian experience. And in fact, also very much geared towards a male experience. So that even for when we're not even considering culture, even for females, the rates of diagnosing females are lower than they are for males because our conception and the way we've understood autism has been more weighted towards males. And that, people are recognizing that. And that's probably a discussion for another day. But when it comes to the cultural sensitivities, there's more that can be done in looking at and understanding where a community, where people are at. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that I come up against is that a child, maybe a child who's come from an African background, because the family are not so aware about autism, they may not be so forthcoming in seeking help and seeking support, or in understanding that the child needs help and support. Um, and the one aspect of being a professional may be, we go in there, we tell them as it is, they've got to accept it, and you're trying to force this on them, where actually the better approach is to help them to understand, is to be culturally sensitive, and to sort of give them a little bit more time, give them a little bit more space, and whereby you may see the typical case in 2 sessions, give them a little bit more time and understand where they are coming from. Because I've found that when that is the approach, then people are more accepting.
Mm.
Now, if you look at societies where there is a lot more awareness, that in those kind of societies there is a lot more support, in a nutshell, where people are geared up towards identifying or seeking support. They will then demand those supports, they will then demand those diagnostic, so things then grow organically. But where the people don't have the knowledge or people don't have the awareness, then services can be less than they should be. And of course there is still also economic and demographic differences, because sometimes people who live in poor areas don't get the service that they need. So that's also an influence. But yes, if people have more awareness, then that can be a driver to them actually then, either coming together as a group, or, going to see the proper authorities and the MPs also, and advocating for better support and better diagnostic pathways.
Wow. Thank you for that, and thank you. I know I put you in the middle there, but thank you for yes. So for anybody listening, please, if you need the support, go out there, put embarrassment behind you, because at the end of the
Yes,
day, it's going to give you a better experience with whoever you're caring for.
absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely.
I guess I've touched on what I wanted to ask next, which has to do with if people actually hide their
Mm,
circumstances.
yeah,
Y-
I
y-
mean,
yeah.
it's a bit of uh, hiding in plain sight, as it were.
Mm,
Um, Particularly if you live in a society where children go to school, and so they are very visible, or you have systems where there are regular surveillance from um, health visiting, and so on and so forth. Then you can't really sort of hide, or your attempts to hide will be in plain sight. But I suppose if you're hiding, what you're really what I can perceive from what you're saying is that actually not facing the situation,
yeah.
not facing the reality. and that again can be for a lot of different reasons. Um, that can be because the culture that you're in, the culture that you subscribe to, doesn't actually recognize what autism is.
Mhm.
I've assessed children who um, I know that their culture doesn't even have a language for what is autism. Yeah, there isn't a construct of,
Mhm.
as far as you're concerned. It may be that this child is crazy, this child is mad, this child is demon possessed, this child needs healing, and so on and so forth. So when those constructs are not there, then other things will fill the gap. Um, so yeah, there is, at the core of that, different families have different experiences, of course, but people will hide also because they are afraid of facing the reality. If those who are parents who are listening, from the time that you conceive that child, you have hopes and dreams. Even if you don't write them down, they are implicit. And then from the time that you start to see things that are different, you know those hopes and dreams start to become different, sometimes shattered. So having a child who is autistic actually forces you to look, and sometimes that can be a bit too painful. So people might hide, or be
Mhm.
in denial
Right.
about autism.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow. You touch on fates there. I'm just amazed though that it's like the way you're going about it is just hitting the questions that I still have on my table. I have loads of questions. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to go through all of them, but very importantly,
Mm,
talking about fates, because again, I was doing a little bit of reading and I found even in the Middle East,
yes.
people I'm not sure the right word is, are superstitious about it. They think there's an evil eye there, and they may want to consult something. And so, talk maybe because you mentioned about faith at the beginning when you're talking
Mm,
about being a singing doctor. Do you think some things get spiritualized or over demonized in some African cultures? I hear people who will go throw the child away and think
yeah.
it's witchcraft, and
Yeah.
some too may say it's poor parenting skills. That's why
Yeah.
you have that. Can you please speak to
Yeah.
that situation?
No, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, autism is real. Autism is, there's a healthy body of research that span decades that has shown us that actually, when you look at the brain of an individual and you do scans and you do assessments, it's very different. Um, there is no witchcraft or spirituality that can affect a child in such a way, um, and really, what, as I said, as I mentioned earlier, where there isn't that construct, where people haven't understood what autism is, then they start to put in all these different explanations. So be it witchcraft and so on and so forth. So I mean, my what I would implore anyone that may still have that as a background is actually to see the reality that is in front of you. Um, I mean, there it is often said that um, autism. I mean, there is a movement now that actually is saying, in some shape and form, autism is part of general society. We can all think about times when, or we've seen someone um, who can be very, very focused. They just want to get that thing done. Um, and that can be a very autistic focus. Does that mean that
Mm,
they've got autism? No, it may mean that they just have a trait. So there's this whole concept that is developing called neurodiversity, where individuals are seen as, actually, it takes all kinds to make a world. If you perceive the world in that way, it doesn't mean that you've got a disease, doesn't mean you've got a demon. It just means that your brain functions differently. And there are many things that individuals who are autistic or on the autistic from spectrum do very, very well. You may have seen individuals who have remarkable photographic memory, and they can draw something in remarkable detail that they only saw flashed in front of them. Or you can, someone who can do accounts with such meticulousness. So it is not, it is not due to demons. It is not due to poor parenting. Interestingly, on the poor parenting front, there are certain things that a pediatrician like myself can see in a baby. Once a baby, is born, maybe give it even 6 weeks, we can start to see some signs of autism that early. So it's nothing to do with your parenting. um, and really, there's a whole different topic about the cause of autism. But one of the strongest factors is genetics. That is why individuals, we know that individuals who are diagnosed with autism, when you look closely in the family, you may see others with traits. Either they have minor traits, or they've just, because of the generation in which they lived, it wasn't recognized. So that's one of the strongest factors that determines if someone, gets autism or not. But yeah, it's not to do with demons. It's not to do with parenting. It's a neurological condition. It's a neurological. In some extremes, I would call it a disorder, but also in another extreme is actually a condition. So people function sometimes superiorly, sometimes just perfectly fine, and they are autistic.
Mm. So if I'm to pick a cue from what you've said, so even for somebody who maybe believes in prayer and things like that, it's good to do the prayer bit, but it's also good to see a specialist.
Absolutely,
Mm.
absolutely. I mean, when I was working in a certain part of the southeast, um, it was typical for me to see parents from a particular African country, and they are very they're Christians, and or they've got a very strong faith, and that is exactly what I tell them. I don't I And I'm a Christian myself, so I know the value of prayer. I know the value of asking God to intervene in this situation. But you've got to come from a point of knowledge, a point of understanding. Don't bury your head in the sand. Um, uh, don't redefine necessarily what you are saying, but approach it from seeing the specialist, seeing what they are saying. You can then say, okay, that's what they've said. Well, I'm going to invoke prayer. I'm going to take this child before the Lord, and the things that they said this child will never do, we're going to pray that this child will do them. So in that way, you are actually bringing more glory to God, because you are then able to say, actually, they defined the autism that is in my child, but actually this my child is doing way better. He's able to do this, that, and the other, and all praise to God. That's the power of prayer.
Mm.
Um, but autism is real. It is something that we need to face, and there are extremes to it, of course. But should we be praying autism away? I don't think so. I think there are aspects of autism that actually is very helpful for the individual. um, but should we be then throwing the baby away with the bathwater? Absolutely not. So there is a balance that we can achieve when we're approaching a young person, or an adult, or even with autism.
Awesome. Thank you. This has been so enriching, so resourceful in terms of the content that's come out here today. Let's come to parents and maybe those carers of autistic people. I
Hmm.
mean, from all that we've been saying, sometimes the shame, the
Yeah.
embarrassment, and all that they go through.
Hmm.
Um, can healthcare systems do something for such people? And then, secondly, what advice would you give to such parents or new caregivers as well?
Yeah, I think from a professional point of view, one thing that I am aware of is not to add to the stigma, is not to uh, blame parents, um, one for maybe not picking up things early enough, or not for not recognizing. So I really try to, yeah, you know, go to their level, want to sort of see things from their point of view, not be judgmental. And as healthcare professionals, sometimes we can be judgmental. So we have to be really, really careful about that. In the way that we address individuals, particularly after we've made that diagnosis, um, we can be affirmative rather than, negative. One of the things that I tell parents, when I've broken the news, of autism to them about their child, is that, you the child that you came in with is still the child you're leaving this room with. Um, the future is bright. We just need to find out ways in which we can support you and support this child to achieve their potential. And then I give them examples, of professionals, um, who are autistic and they are functioning perfectly well, sometimes ahead of their peers. So it really coming from that positive point of view that autism is not some kind of death sentence. It doesn't mean the life of your child is over. It does mean that you then have to reassess, what your hopes and your expectations were, and it does mean that your experiences will be different, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your experiences will be wholly negative.
Mm.
Um, so to the parent who maybe has just been given that diagnosis, don't panic. Um, Really, there are lots of positives that you can take away from this, and surround yourself with individuals who are positive about autism, because quite often, depending on which community that you live in, there is that echo that goes on that really drives stigma, that drives isolation. If you need to change some friends, get to know people who are living with this, um, understand things a little bit more. So we always advocate for going for courses. And this day and age, with the internet and things, there are lots of good courses on that. I mentioned the National Autistic Society earlier, and they have lots of good courses as well. So arming yourself with knowledge is very important, because you are going to be the main advocate for your child. People like myself will come and go, but you are the main advocate. And so when you have the knowledge, then you can advocate for them better. Then you can
Mm.
understand their behavior patterns and everything like that better. Um, I would say don't listen to quacks. If you go on the internet and you put in autism, lots of things will come on. Now, people will be telling you that you can cure autism with this tablet. Take it once a day, your child will be fine. Um, Sorry, it's not quite that simple.
Okay.
There is no cure for autism. There is only
Mm.
management. So don't listen to quacks, and take care of yourself. And that's so, so important, because this is different to the experience that you expected you're going to have. And by definition of that, things are stressful in those kind of environments. So take care of yourself, use the support that is around you from family and friends. When you need to take time out, take time out. And one of the things that I find really sad in my world is that a lot of families that I see are broken,
Mm.
because of not taking care of each other. Broken in terms of the mom and dad are not together. Of course, there may be other factors, but one of the biggest factor is that this can be a strain on the family. But I also know families where, because people have addressed that, because the couple have sought the right kind of support, they're able to give time to each other, they're able to give time to the other children, and to be able to live a more balanced life. So it's definitely possible, but it's very important to look after yourself, look after your own well-being as well.
Mm. Wow, that is so good. That is so good. Thank you so much for that. I just got a couple more questions, if you don't mind.
Mhm.
I know our time is almost up, but just a few more things. Some of them we have touched on in
Okay.
terms of the areas of support as
Yeah.
well. I just wanted to bring in this aspect of education. You talk about people coming from certain backgrounds and where unfortunately maybe the resources or the training is not that they are not great teachers and not they're excellent, but maybe in behavioral activity psychology and all that they don't pick up things. They think the kid is slow, they think the kid is non-communicative and things like that. Do you think those differences in systems also creates a problem? Maybe somebody now comes over to this side of the world and so I'm not used to these sort of things, you know. How does somebody deal with that when the systems only cater for what I would call the neurotypical kind of person?
Yeah. When it's a complex, it's a complex issue, and it very much depends in the context um, that you are in. So the economic context, the whether you live in the West or you live in other parts of the world where the level of awareness is not as high, and people still have very stigmatizing you know, thought patterns. But even in the West, there is the variation. Um, so that's why making a diagnosis in the first instance is important. But you do have situations which, yeah, teachers don't really understand um, how to deal with an autistic individual. Um, and even when it has been recognized. So as a parent, that's where your own advocacy can come in. That's where you can actually say, you know, this is what my child is like. This is what they need. Um, can we look at ways of providing it for them? In the British the British educational system, there is actually money that is put aside to support, you know, each child in a school who may have additional help, and there are levels of that. So as a parent, you may need to pursue that if you're finding that, you know, your child, the needs of your child are not being met, because it can be something as that may seem as simple as, you know, your child not wanting to eat in the same place as other children are eating because of the sensory issues. So if you have a teacher who is not sensitive to that, who is always thinking, no, this is the rules, you must stay here, then you have a problem. Then you have a child who is not experiencing um, anything positive about school. So there are steps that can be taken as a parent and support that you can bring in. I mean, we in a lot of areas in the UK, because we are guided by different guidance that come out centrally, either from the Department for Education or from the Department of Health. There's some these guidelines called the NICE guidance. Um, we have to subscribe to them, and that's a universal thing. So, you know, you can actually sometimes have to be a lawyer and actually say, the NICE guidance says da 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 da. Why isn't my child getting this? So
Mm,
you can advocate from your child from that place, and there are organizations that will support families in getting what is, you know, what is right for their child. You know, charities that will support that support the, you know, children in getting that support that, you know, that they need. Um,
mm.
yeah, I'm not sure that have I answered that
You
question.
have. I mean, yes. Thank you so much for that, and that actually led to the next part, the next question as well. Access in terms of support, but you've mentioned a
Yeah,
number of National Autistic Society and all the other ones that you did.
yeah. I mean,
Right.
the you know, within, I think it's actually statutory, um, that is, it's written in law, that in the special educational needs by or laws of England, there each council has to provide a special team that is impartial and that can provide I can provide support for parents. In different parts of the country, it's called different things, but they are there specifically to support parents, so they can walk parents through, you know, what they think is necessary to for their child to be supported. And for children who are really struggling within the mainstream school setting, even with the additional support, then there are specialist schools that can really cater to their needs. But there is a step, in the process that needs to be gone
Mm.
through.
Okay. Thank you for saying that because when you talked about the fact that if the mainstream school cannot do it, the special schools, because I was thinking, well, wouldn't that make some people think, why don't I homeschool my child? Where I don't have the issues of I'm at work and they call me that my child was disruptive
Yeah,
and I have to go pick the child up and things like that. Which can be very, very stressful for some parents and things like that. So it's good to know that those are there. Thank you so much for sharing that information. I'm going to throw in a very final question.
okay.
Is I've enjoyed the session so much. I didn't even want to take a break in it, so we could get the most out of you. Uh, as a society, that is, I mean, you obviously are already involved in the system, but as a society, how can we help improve the lives of autistic people and their carers, whether in families, workplaces, schools, communities?
Okay. Loaded question. um, I think education is crucial. Raising awareness is crucial, and really, by virtue of our listeners taking their time to listen to this, we have achieved something. Um, and it's now for us as individuals, so we're starting at an individual level, to become change agents, to set better example. It may be, out at our faith groups, at church, when there is a scene, reframing how we respond to that. It may be looking at our processes in terms of when we have meetings, how do we actually cater for this eventuality, of a child who may become upset, or an adult even who may be autistic, and so how do we improve our settings to be more autism friendly? I think that's something that we can do, but it starts with education. um, we need to be inclusive, and on an individual level, it may be that when you're organizing a party for Rosemary, who has turned 5, and you want to invite the whole class. Don't exclude anybody. Be friendly with the parents, and if you can even indicate on your invite, is there anything that we need to know about your child, so that we can plan. And these are things that may seem little, but they have a vast impact on families, because one of the biggest areas is isolation. Social isolation, economic isolation, those are big things. Emotional isolation, for families. So as individuals, we can extend that arm of friendship. Um, and there are things to celebrate about autism. When you find out a little bit more, you can see that actually, individuals who are autistic, they can see things as clear as day. They can see things really black and white. They bring a perspective, that when you look at it, you think, oh, I didn't see it that way before. But that is so true. So we can celebrate their skills, we can celebrate their talents, we can celebrate what they bring to the table. Yes, they may not be the most, you know, um, personable, in terms of their approach, but actually, it's not because they're meaning to be rude or anything like that. It's just the way they are. So starting to see that actually, autism is not necessarily something to be feared, something to cast out. Um, in some, it's not even an illness. We don't class it as an illness. We may say it's a disorder, particularly at the extremes. But so our perceptions, affect our behavior. So looking to change our own perceptions, can actually help, families around us. Um, yeah, so don't be judgmental, don't perpetuate the stigma, um, be a change agent, be inclusive. those are all things that I think that we can do on a practical level. And as an organization as well, at work, if you're involved in recruitment, for example, don't be switched off if you read in the line of a person's CV, for example, if they declare a disability. Don't be turned off by that, because they may end up being the biggest asset to your organization. There's so many things that we can do, but that's a start.
All right. Yes, always the start. Thank you so much for this wealth of information you shared with us, Dr. Soji.
It's a pleasure.
I know the audience that have been on have enjoyed it. Yvonne says very enlightening. Carmen says awesome, very interesting, very well explained. It's an eye opener. Dr. Soji, thank you so much.
It's a
And
pleasure.
I echo that. Thank you so much for this. And I believe that those who will be watching later would also benefit. The resource places he mentioned,
Mm,
please go out and reach out for them. Don't be embarrassed, because this is going to
yeah,
help you, help the
absolutely.
person you're caring for, and make everybody's life a happier one for the future.
Yes.
I want to take this opportunity just to say a very big thank you to you, Dr. Soji,
Thank you.
um, again for that very insightful. There, another comment coming in. Yeah, thank you so much, and we look forward to the great things and for you and your colleagues, and the great work you do among children, leading them into adolescence, adulthood, and all that. Thank you so much for all that you do, and may greater wisdom come
Thank
for greater breakthroughs
thank you.
in the thing that will make happier lives for everybody in our communities. Thank
I
you
mean,
so much.
I would also say thank you for shining a light, on this aspect, and really on the whole area of neurodevelopmental problems, and those kind of hidden disabilities that we need to face as a community of people, needs to make lives better. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's been a privilege.